Welcome to Mr. Hutchings History, where the past comes alive. Let's dive into today's story.
So, 1983, huh? Talk about a year where the world almost went up in smoke.
Yeah, it's a year that makes you realize just how fragile everything is.
You've brought some pretty intense stuff for us to unpack about this whole Cold War thing.
It's one of those periods in history that just grabs you.
Like, I wasn't even alive then, and I'm already getting anxious just thinking about it.
And that's what makes it so fascinating.
Okay, so before we get into the nitty-gritty, set the stage for us.
Right, so picture this. It's the Cold War.
Two superpowers staring each other down, both with enough nukes to turn the planet into a cinder.
Exactly, that constant fear, that knowledge that things could go very, very wrong at any moment.
It's hard to even imagine living like that, you know?
It permeated everything. Every news bulletin, every political speech.
So you've got this backdrop of existential dread.
And then enter Ronald Reagan.
The Gipper. Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall. Am I right?
He was a whole different ballgame compared to previous presidents.
How so?
Well, for starters, he wasn't afraid to call out the Soviet Union.
Yeah, that whole evil empire thing, that was Reagan, right?
He believed that the Soviets were an existential threat to the United States.
And to democracy, the whole shebang.
Exactly. And he wasn't afraid to say it loud and clear.
You know, it's interesting you mentioned that because Reagan, she was an actor, right?
That's right, he was.
So do you think that background being a communicator, did that influence how he handled things on a global stage?
Oh, absolutely.
Hmm.
Reagan understood the power of words.
And presentation, the whole package.
Take the Strategic Defense Initiative, for example, the Star Wars program.
Okay, Star Wars, now we're talking. Wasn't that this super ambitious missile defense system?
Exactly. Ambitious and, some would argue, not entirely realistic with the technology available at the time.
So it was more about sending a message.
It was a bold statement, a way of saying, we're not backing down.
And how did the Soviets take all of this?
Well, imagine you're already feeling the pressure, and then your rival starts flexing their muscles.
Not a good feeling.
The thing is, the Soviet Union wasn't exactly a well-oiled machine in the early 80s.
What do you mean?
They were dealing with a whole host of internal problems.
Like what?
Their economy was stagnant, the bureaucracy was bloated, and their leadership.
Well,
What about their leadership?
let's just say they weren't exactly known for their youthful energy. Brezhnev, their longtime leader.
Yeah, I've seen pictures. Not exactly a spring chicken.
He left behind a bit of a power vacuum, and the guys who took over, they were... Well, let's just say change wasn't their strong suit.
So it's a recipe for disaster.
You've got these two superpowers, both armed to the teeth, both dealing with internal pressures, and both deeply suspicious of the other.
Yeah, I'm starting to see where this is going.
And it's about to get a whole lot tenser.
Oh boy, here we go. Okay, so we're talking actual moments where nuclear war almost happened in 1983, right?
Oh, absolutely. Moments that still send chills down your spine.
So give me the rundown, because I need to know.
Well, one that immediately comes to mind is the Korean Airlines Flight 0007 incident. Oh, yeah, that rings a bell. They shot down a civilian plane, right?
Yeah, a Boeing 747 full of passengers.
What were they thinking?
It was September 1st, 1983.
Okay.
This Korean Airlines flight was on its way from Alaska to South Korea.
Makes sense so far.
But somewhere along the way, it deviated from its planned route and strayed into Soviet airspace.
Oh boy, that's a no-no.
Now, to this day, the reasons for this deviation are still debated. But the Soviets, they were already on edge.
I bet with everything going on.
They saw this unidentified aircraft entering their airspace, and they scrambled a fighter jet.
Oh man, this is making my stomach churn.
The Soviets, they perceived this plane as a potential threat, maybe even a spy plane.
And I'm guessing they didn't just escort it out of their airspace.
No, they shot it down. All 269 passengers and crew members perished.
Oh my God, that's just unthinkable. I can't even imagine the outrage.
It was global Reagan. He called it a massacre, an act of barbarism. The Soviets, they claimed it was a spy plane, a provocation.
So more miscommunication, more mistrust on top of an already volatile situation.
Exactly. And as if that wasn't enough, just a couple of months later, another incident brought the world to the brink.
Okay, lay it on me. This sounds intense.
This time it revolved around a NATO military exercise. They called it Abel Archer 83.
Abel Archer, I think I've heard of this. What was it exactly?
Basically, it was a simulation, a really, really elaborate one.
Okay, how elaborate are we talking?
We're talking full-scale troop movements,
Yeah.
coded messages, the works. They even simulated nuclear launch sequences.
Hold on, they were pretending to launch nukes. Talk about a risky move.
The idea was to test NATO's response capabilities in case of a Soviet attack. They wanted to make it as realistic as possible.
But I mean, did nobody stop to think that maybe, just maybe, this might freak out the Soviets a tad?
Well, some NATO leaders did express concerns, but the exercise went ahead as planned.
And the Soviets, how did they react to this simulated apocalypse on their doorstep?
Not well. Remember, they were already primed to believe that Reagan was looking for an excuse to strike.
Right, the whole evil empire thing.
They had intelligence reports, some accurate, some not, suggesting that a U.S. attack was imminent.
So when they saw NATO running around pretending to launch nukes,
They panicked. Soviet forces went on high alert. Nuclear launch crews were put on standby.
you're kidding. They were that close to launching a real counterattack based on a simulation.
It was a very real possibility.
Yeah.
The world held its breath for what felt like an eternity, waiting to see if someone would blink.
So what happened? How did we pull back from the abyss this time?
Well, the thing is, even at the height of the Cold War, things weren't always so black and white.
You mean people weren't just itching to push the button?
Exactly. The Soviet leadership, they weren't a monolithic bloc. There were different factions, different opinions.
So it wasn't just one guy with his finger on the button, thank God.
No, thankfully not. And in the case of Abel Archer, cooler heads prevailed.
So someone in the Kremlin had to step up and say, hold on, comrades, let's not end the world just yet.
Pretty much. Andropov, the Soviet leader at the time, he was a tough cookie. But he wasn't reckless.
So a hardliner, but not insane. Gotcha.
He understood what was at stake. He knew that a nuclear war would be catastrophic for everyone, including the Soviet Union.
Yeah, no winning a nuclear war.
Exactly. And there's evidence suggesting that Andropov received intelligence reports from Western sources confirming that Abel Archer was indeed an exercise.
Wait, so spies might have saved the world? That's straight out of a movie.
It's a reminder that history is full of these what-if moments. But, beyond the immediate crisis, I think Abel Archer and the KAL-0007 incident had a lasting impact.
How so?
They were a wake-up call for both sides. Suddenly, this abstract threat of nuclear war became all too real.
Yeah, I can't imagine that was a fun realization.
It forced them to confront the abyss they were staring into. And I think it played a role in the eventual thawing of the Cold War.
So you're saying 1983, this year of near misses, might have actually paved the way for peace?
It's hard to say for sure, but it definitely shifted the conversation. After 83, you see a renewed emphasis on dialogue, on arms control, on finding ways to manage this rivalry without blowing up the planet.
Well, thank goodness for that. So we went from the brink of nuclear war to, well, not quite peace and love, but at least a willingness to talk.
Exactly. And that's something to keep in mind. We often focus on the conflicts, the moments of crisis. But it's equally important to remember those who work behind the scenes to prevent disaster, to build bridges.
Absolutely. This whole deep dive has been an incredible journey. Talk about an emotional roller coaster.
It really makes you appreciate the fragility of peace and the importance of clear communication, especially when dealing with something as dangerous as nuclear weapons.
Couldn't have said it better myself. A huge thank you to you for walking us through this. And to everyone listening, we leave you with this thought. Did the close calls of 1983 make the world a safer place, or simply delay the inevitable? Something to ponder. Until next time, this has been your deep dive.
Thanks for listening to Mr. Hutchings History. Keep exploring, and we'll see you next time.